Welcome back, everybody, to
The Worthy Podcast.
Today, we're in a little bit of different scenery.
We
right?
are in a different scenery.
So, we've had some busy schedules recently.
Yes.
We've said that we're going to film today for the past 4 days.
Maybe 3. I think 4 is a bit much.
3. Well, I think the past 3 days, but we were trying to film before.
That's right.
As well. So
yeah.
there's been a few days that we've tried to film this. We've been super busy.
Oh.
So we're currently on the road traveling.
And we made it to my couch.
And we made it to your couch. So thank you for having me at your couch.
Thank you for
Appreciate
coming.
it.
You know?
No, of course. So anyway, this is the episode where we talk about the sermon that just went up last Friday.
Let's
titled
Walk Where the Light
Is.
Is.
Right.
Such a good.
That was a good one.
That was a really good sermon.
That was a good one. I was very excited about that one. I've just been excited about my sermons recently. And I was even thinking about it this morning, and I was like, the Bible is just like real to me. And so I think that's why I love preaching so much, is because I want other people to see how real it is. Like, it's not just a book of stories. Like, it's real life lessons.
Like how you can relate to it now.
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
That's what I love about it. And so I think this sermon was it was timely for me personally. It was applicable and practical for me personally.
Well, I think that goes with anything that we preach on. It describes what's happening in the middle of our lives right now. We're like, oh God, you're really throwing us for a loop now and helping us experience how to walk the right way, even though we're struggling with the same thing we're preaching on.
And ain't it great?
It's great.
Ain't it great how God moves, huh?
He keeps us on our toes, accountable for stuff.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. So anyway, if you haven't watched the sermon, you should go check it out. It should be on all the platforms, whatever you're watching this on. Just go to the last video that was posted. You should be able to find it. But for those of you who did watch this, even if you didn't, you can still watch the podcast. That's fine. But for everyone else, we're going to go ahead and let's just jump right into the notes.
Well, you first started off with like a big old question I wasn't even ready for. And it said, are you questioning God or trying to let me do that again.
Yeah. No, you got it.
So sorry. It's been a whole week.
It's been a week.
You said, are you questioning God or trying to compromise? And I'm like,
no.
Wow. Just hit it off from the gun. It's like, are we trying to compromise, say, hey, God, like, I know this is supposed to happen, but maybe we can take my route and go a little bit this way and try to, decipher and play sides and be a little bit flexible. But sometimes God say, no, I'm not going to be flexible. I'm going to go my way or with a highway, like it's going to be my set way, or you're going to have many roads ahead of you before you get back to my way. And it's going to be a long journey from there. But yeah, that first question that you were speaking on, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And right underneath it, it says, I want to follow God's plan, but you got to do that at God's pace. And I'm like, okay, so first we can't compromise with God, and we can't, like, if we do compromise, then we're going to go on a lot of routes to get back to Him. Or we don't have to do that. We can just go on God's way, God's plan, and go at His pace. Man, your words just making me not speak. Like, just go at God's pace.
Yeah, I think the way that I put it was we got to go God's plan, God's way at God's pace. And that was off the dome in the moment. No, just kidding. No, it really was. That wasn't in my notes. That was just something that came out. I remember going up there, like, I really don't have any kind of an introduction. I'm just going straight into the text.
Yeah.
And so that's why it started off like that.
Jumped in.
It's so, but yeah, because in case you didn't know, the whole sermon is talking about Yeah,
No.
the Israelites,
Yeah.
right after they got freed out of captivity in Egypt. Sorry, I'm working on my next sermon, so I'm trying to go back. But it's talking about the Israelites right after they were freed from captivity, and a big part of it talks about the pillar of fire that was leading them through the wilderness. And so what you see is that God had a route for them to take. A route that was leading to a destination that they knew of. They
Yeah.
knew the destination. They knew where they're supposed to be going. It was called the Promised Land because it was promised to them. You can't get much more on the nose than that, right? But what you see, and it's similar in the story of like Joseph as well, where they know where they are right now. And then in the story of Joseph, he has a dream that he would have a position of authority. He has a dream that people would bow down to him, right? And then with the Israelites, they know where they are right now, but they have a promise that they're going to have this great blessing, a land flowing with milk and honey that God will give them. And so, like, think of the two stories together. You have Joseph and the Israelites. They know where they are right now, and they know the destination. And I think sometimes in our lives, when we know where we are right now, and then we know the calling, or we have a dream, or we have a vision that God gives for us, and he lays it out what that future is going to look like, but it doesn't always go from point A to point B.
I don't think it's ever going to be a straight line,
I
if
don't
we're being
think
honest.
ever in history has it ever gone from point A to point
I
B.
think I explained to you last night in a conversation that our life is going to be like a roller coaster. We're going to go up and down, up and down. We have a high moments, oh yeah, praise God, and we have a low moments, oh God, I'm in trouble, I need help. And it goes just up and down. It might be windy, it might go on a curve, but our lives is it's like one giant roller coaster, and you just got to be on the ride with God and stay at His pace and let Him control the speed of the roller coaster. That brings me to like a little. We went to Virginia, right? And I was with my cousins, and they brought out the simulator thing, and so I put that thing on my eyes, and I do the roller coaster simulator.
It's a VR headset.
That's what
for
it
those
is.
watching at home.
And I put that thing on, and I had two controllers in my hands, and I had to control a roller coaster, and I had a go and a brake. And like you had to go fast so you can get up the hill, but then you had to brake because it's going to go on a curve. And if you go too fast, I died and I went in the water. And so I'm like, okay, how do I go at a good pace so that way I can get up the hill but don't fall off? And that's the same way with like God. We got to go with God's pace, and He'll help us go up that little mountain, and then He'll help us go around that little curve and not fall off that curve because we're with Him. And if we go with Him at that exact pace, then we won't fall off and go into like a state where we're not with God or at a low point. So I thought that was like really cool, relating it to like a little roller coaster. That VR headset really got me sometimes. I got so angry with that thing.
And I think it's important to realize that the contract that you sign, metaphorically, when you become a Christian is saying, I'm going to hop in God's roller coaster and let Him drive. Or I'm going to hop in the car and I don't have a GPS. And
you just let Him take you for a ride.
And you just let Him drive. And that can be really difficult sometimes. Like, even just today, I'll give another story. Even just today, we were driving home from church, and I always like to put the directions in my phone so I can see it. And I'm like, okay, I have this long before I have to turn. I'm going to turn left, so I'll get into this lane. So it's like I can plan ahead because I know the next turn, right? And I know which lane I have to be in. I know, like, okay, what's the speed limit? I just say, okay, that's fine. We're 5 over. That's fine. Whatever, right? Anyway. But I was driving home and I had the person in the passenger seat. They were giving me directions. And so it's like, I just had to drive and then just wait for him to be like, oh yeah, you're going to turn left here. Oh yeah, you're going to turn right here. And I was just thinking like, this would be such a good sermon illustration because it's the same thing in life where we're just driving, we're just going. We don't have the GPS. Sometimes we don't have the destination. We definitely don't have in 500 feet turn right. Sometimes what we have is we're just going. And then like that, God's going to say, I want you to go here. I want you to turn here.
Oh,
go ahead.
And at that moment, you got to be open ears and listen, because if you're not listening to what they said, if you fall asleep at the wheel and you're not listening to the directions that God has for you, then you're not going to make that right turn and you're going to go the wrong way where you did like we was traveling last night, and I didn't give you directions on the phone. I said, "All right, Jared, turn here or turn here," and you had me talking. You had me distracted, and so when you didn't,
I had you distracted, right? Yep. So it's my fault that you were distracted.
Anyways, and so at that moment, you kept going straight. I'm like, "Oh, Jared, you missed your turn," and sometimes we're gonna miss our turn because what did we not do? We didn't stop. We didn't be quiet, and we did not listen.
We weren't paying attention to God.
We weren't paying attention to God, because if we did, if we listened to Him, then we would make that right turn.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, let's just build off of that.
All right.
Even though I missed the turn, there was still a way to get to where we were.
I'm like, all right, Jared, there's either 2 ways to get to this house, and it's this way or this way. I'm like, it's okay. There's always another way. Mm-hmm. Even when we go off a wrong path to God's plan, God still has a plan. Mm-hmm. They're like, that didn't go down the hole. That didn't go down the drain. There's not a dead end. God's like, okay, well, how about let's regroup? How about you listen to me this time, and I'm going to get you back on my plan. Mm-hmm. Well, if we don't, then we're leading ourselves to a dead end.
We're preaching early here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's good. But, yeah. So I think that's kind of a big moral of the sermon, kind of the main point of the sermon. I'm sure we'll dive into some specifics. Mm-hmm. Just that sometimes it's hard to follow God because He won't take you the way that you think that you're supposed to go, or the way that you had in mind that you were going to go. And so, yeah. Let's keep going. Let's keep diving in here.
All right. Well, I want to actually read the passage of Exodus 13.
Let's jump in.
Because I think just reading this and getting a feel for what the Word says will make a little bit more sense of what we're going to talk about next. Mm-hmm. So in Exodus 13, 17 through 22, it says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead him on a road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. And you were talking about earlier how, God led them through a different path than what we might think. And that's what He did for the Israelites right here. He didn't take the shorter, easy route because He had a plan and He had a purpose for that. And we're going to get to that. Mm-hmm. All right, and that says, for God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people around by the desert road towards the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the sons of Israel swear an oath. He said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up with you from this place. After leaving Skadath,
So I actually went on Blue Letter Bible to get the pronunciations for these.
Oh, boy.
This one, I'm actually forgetting what it was. I think it was Sukkoth.
Sukkoth.
They camped at Etham, I believe.
Okay.
Etham.
So after leaving Sukkoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on the way, and by the night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. This little text, I just loved how throughout the sermon you went through each piece and explained it, because there's a lesson in every single sentence of this text, and it's just so eye-opening, because I never really saw it like that. But we're just gonna go down the line.
Sweet. Of
how you preached it, basically, and just be able to. So we already talked about how God led them through the longer route, through the desert road, and sometimes when we're living out God's calling, He's not always gonna take the shortest, easy route. In this case, for the Israelites, they weren't ready. They weren't ready for that war. Mm-hmm. They're not ready to take on that. And so God's like, all right, since they're not ready yet, since they're not ready in their season, we're going to take them around this long desert so that they can be prepared and equipped for when they do come. Or I can just lead them a different way so that they can just avoid that. So that's what God did. He led them through a long route through the desert to reach the Red Sea. And then we have
Are you at, for God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt? Second part of verse 17.
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah, so there's actually something I want to pose a question that I not pose in the sermon, and this is posing a question I don't really have an answer to, but I think it's just funny to think about. It says, for God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. And I just, when I'm looking at these texts, I'll break it down verse by verse, sentence by sentence, sometimes word by word. I'll look at the Hebrew and I'm trying to dive into make sure I understand this before I preach it. And one of the things that I know, there's a lot that gets left out of the sermon in that study. But there were two things that I want to mention on the podcast that'll be exclusive to here, because I did not mention these in my sermon, but they came up in my study. The second one I have more of an answer to, and the first one I don't really have an answer to. But I like where it says, second part of verse 17, God says, if they face war, they might change their minds. And I was like, they might. If I'm talking to someone and I say, if I was to say that, if I'm trying to think of another scenario where you could say that, if I was to offer Divinity $100 or what's something else? What's something that you really want?
A new pair of running shoes.
All right, so if I was to offer you $100 or a new pair of running shoes, if I was telling someone else, and I would say she might pick the $100, and I use that word "might" because I don't know, right? And so I found it interesting. I was like, and this is probably more on the translation of the text where it says, God says, for if they face war, they might change their minds. And I just kind of read that. I was like, don't you know, God? If they face war, I would expect it to be, if they face war, then they will change their minds, or when they face war, they will change their minds. Instead of God saying, if they face war, they might change their minds. And also, if they face war. And it's like, once again, if. What do you mean? Don't you know? Aren't you leading them to that? And I thought it was interesting that the words that were being used here, and I think it's even more interesting when you go further into the text where it says, if they face war, they might change their minds. And you see both of these things playing out. And this will be part of the sermon that I preach in just a few days here, where once they reach the promised land, they scout out the land, and then they don't go to war. So God says, if they face war, well, a lot of them didn't face war. And so it kind of is an if, because a lot of them didn't, and it was the next generation that came and then actually took the promised land. And then it says if they face war, they might change their minds. There were some who, when they faced war, they did change their minds. But then there was a small group of people who, even after the bad scouting report came in, they said, no, the Lord's going to give it to us, even though the Lord had pulled away his blessing and say, I'm not going to give this to you. And Moses says, don't go up because God is not with you. They said, we're going to go anyway. And they go up and they get destroyed. And so you have it both ways where it's like, if they face war, they might change their minds. You had some people who changed their minds, and you have some people who didn't face war. And so I think it's just interesting, you could say the almost uncertain wording, if and might. And what you see is actually both of these situations play out, because some do and some don't face war, and then some do and some don't change their minds. And so I think that's interesting, just looking at the text. And so I
think that's probably the best word to put is might, because you don't want to be, all right, if they face war, then some will change their minds, some will not change their minds, but then they're going to return to Egypt. It just adds a lot of words to the text. So I guess might be the best language to use here.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. And then there's another part that I actually wanted to more so clarify and explain, and that is in verse 18. So you have in verse 17 where it says, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. And I talked about this verse in the sermon for forever. That's kind of why I cut these things back, because I need to move on for verse 17. But in verse 18, because one of the points that I used was God says if they face war, they might change their minds. And one of the points that I said is that they're not ready. They're not ready for war. Because if you look at just like one chapter earlier during the Exodus, when Pharaoh finally says, okay, you're free to go, then what do? They grab whatever belongings that they can, they grab some bread, and they get out.
I really don't think they had that much belongings in the first place.
No, they probably didn't have much
stuff
stuff
on their
that
back,
they had to take.
Food, and go.
Right, exactly. So they don't have weapons or armor.
What to say? They got nothing.
Right. And so it says, and so that's why I said they're not ready. But what's interesting is in verse 18, what you read, the Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle.
It says armed for battle in my Bible.
So,
armed for battle. What did they get? God, did you just send down some metal armor down for them to have? Like, doesn't really clarify that, but that's kind of interesting.
So this is something that I wanted to look into. And this is definitely up for translation because the actual Hebrew word can have two kind of different meanings, and you see translations, they take one of two ways. One of them involves like ready for battle, armed for battle, equipped for battle, anything like that. But then there's another translation that some of the versions go with, and I think I could be wrong, but I think it's the New American Standard Bible, the NASB, that says that they went up out of Egypt in martial array. I could be wrong about what the version is, but some versions translate it in martial array, where it's not so much talking about ready for battle or equipped for battle or armed for battle, but what it's talking about, and this is kind of the other potential definition of that Hebrew word that's used, is the formation in which they left Egypt. Which makes a little more sense given the context, because it says they left in martial array, which is how the army would have walked. Because if you want to transport a large group of people, if you just say you're free from Egypt, they're going to run like a herd of cattle and like stomp on each other. So it makes sense that in order to walk out of Egypt, they would have had to have some kind of organization. And where do you get the idea for that organization if not military, the armies back then? Because those are large groups of people that they had to transport somehow. And so I don't want to be like, I'm the authority on this. But to me personally, when looking into it, it makes more sense when you say they left Egypt ready for battle. I would say not so much ready for battle in terms of they had weapons, but more so in the way that they left, it was in a martial array. So they walked in an orderly fashion. Right. Yeah. So that one's still up for translation. I won't give any kind of definitive answer, but that's just something to think about and look into for anyone's personal Bible study. If you would like to do that, I would highly recommend and encourage that you dive into it for yourself. But that was kind of the research that I did. And so I didn't want anybody to be confused, and I want to go ahead and explain myself why I said the point of they weren't ready when the Bible says they were ready, because you can look in different translations and see some different things there. So anyway, I just wanted to go ahead and explain that. Sorry, I was so long-winded. But I figured I dove into this first verse so much that I just wanted to move on. But there were still some things that I wanted to talk about for that verse. So I'm glad I could get them out.
Rich,
yeah, lots
to explain.
Yeah.
And then in verse 21 it says, "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light." So that way they can travel day and night. And I just love how God can think about every little thing to help them eventually get to that promised land. He thought, okay, how am I going to lead them in a way that they can go? And they actually saw like a visible pillar of cloud. And like, all right, so how am I going to lead them at night? And he's like, let's do a fire. And so we can just see the light and just being able to guide. And I'm like, wow, God, he really does think about like all the parts in the lives and like how to guide us. And that's with like anything that we go through. Like we don't have to be the Israelites going to a promised land and we need an actual fire cloud like in our way. But God can just lead us through like simple little steps and tasks along in our day to eventually lead us into the calling that He has for us. He can give us like people to come in contact with, to speak to about, and He can help us by speaking to those people and being able to, help us with our calling, whether that's giving us opportunities in the church and be like, hey, you want to teach one Sunday and see how this goes with the kids? All right. They see that potential in you. They allow you to teach, and they're like, oh, wow, you're really good in this. Maybe you can start pursuing this as a career, and people's lives have been changed in college, changed in their major. It's like ministry. I know that from a friend. That was a friend of a story. She went to my church one day and was able to teach the kids one day, and then my mom saw potential in her. I'm like, hey, you're actually really good at this. I think God has given you a gift. And my mom was the one that reached out to her in the first place. I'm like, hey, you want to just teach to see how this goes? Not to give my mom a break, from teaching for the kids, but she just wanted to see how she would do and how she would interact. And she did really good, very talented. So it's just like things like that of how we don't have to necessarily, all right, God, lead me to the path where I should go. Give me a cloud during the day and lead me to that place. No, it's by people. It's by what they say. It's how they give us things, or how God provides those things to those people to lead us that way. Mm-hmm. So if we're planting that into our daily lives, that is one way we could look at it.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Because I personally have never been on a walk at night, and then all of a sudden, like, this pillar of fire just comes down and doesn't burn anything up, but it just kind of leads me where I'm supposed to go. Like, that has never happened for me. There's never been a pillar of clouds that just guides me while I'm in my car to go and talk to this person, right? Or go to this place. And so you may be thinking like, oh, God doesn't do that today. Like, he does.
Oh, wait.
God still leads. God still guides us today. And I think that's a really good point, that a lot of times that's through other people.
Yeah.
That's through other people talking to you, and God can speak through them. Now, I would caution people, because I've heard people say that they're like, man, I always hear God through other people. And it's good to be able to hear God through other people, but I think it's also really important to be able to cultivate listening to God's voice yourself.
But say, hear God for yourself, because you can all day, like, you can see other people's relationships. I just talked about when I was preaching about other people's relationships, and you can see that relationship and being like built with God, but if you don't have that own relationship with God and hearing him out, then how is that growing your relationship? Like, you see all these good things people do for God and being able to grow with God in their lives, but you want that for your life too. Like, if you see how good it is for them and how they can still have joy in the midst of despair, you want that for yourself too. So yeah, exactly. Like, being able to hear and listen to God for yourself and creating that best friend relationship with him is something we all need.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably been one of the greatest gifts, has been being able to hear God's voice. And that started with having a personal prayer time when I was 12 years old. That's when I began to cultivate a relationship with God, and out of that, and after time and practice and prayer, was I able to start to understand and hear his voice more and more until now there's like ways to recognize it. But I think it's really important to be able to cultivate that practice to hear God for yourself so that you can hear where he's guiding you. But kind of back to the pillar, sometimes you can hear God, sometimes it's other people talking to you, sometimes it's just a piece about a decision. There's a lot of different ways that God still leads today. And for you, it's probably not going to be a pillar of fire or a pillar of clouds that just shows up, but look around for how God might be guiding you, because he still does that today. So anyway, I just want to go and talk about that, but there's probably more to dive into.
I was about to say,
ahead,
just a little piggyback.
Yeah.
When we was talking about like being able to hear God, I was struggling with this for like a long time, where I'm like, God, I just want to hear you. I just want to like be able to speak and hear you, and I was pouring out to him. And that's something that doesn't come overnight. Like, that relationship with God, it starts like a little baby. And it grows and it grows and it grows until you have a mature adult relationship with God. But when you're first starting off, you're not going to be able to hear God. Now, you might. But most of the time, it's like you got to build that relationship with God. And that was with prayer. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty sure at 12, you didn't exactly hear God when you're praying, you know. You just hope that he hears you, and because you're just speaking out, all right, dear God, this is a bit weird. I'm in my room. It's quiet. But, Lord, I trust that you're up there. I just hope that you're able to hear me.
That's exactly how I pray.
See, that's how we think when we first start out praying. And then it gets more real. Like, and you pour out to him, like, Lord, I actually do hear you. I hear your presence. It's just known. And sometimes I just bawl my eyes out. I'm like, Lord, I'm crying out to him. And I'm like, Lord, I know you hear me. I just need a breakthrough. I just need to be able to be heard. And I just want to hear your voice for this next step, because it's something that's really going to impact me. And I just need to be able to be still and hear you. And it takes a lot of guts from being like 12th year old me. Sorry, I said that wrong. 12-year-old me. All right, God, this is all new to me, but we're going to give this a shot, to now. And you're like, wow, Lord, I heard you then. And you might not hear God like through your little voice inside your head. It might be through different signs that he gives you, through a Bible verse, through scripture, through what people say to you, interactions. Mm-hmm. That's how he guides us, through our plans, you know. It's just, you got to be on the lookout. We got to pay attention to where God is leading us. And that's hard with our busy, distracting lives.
I think just one last thing that I want to throw in there is that when you are wholeheartedly following God, he will speak to you every time that you need him to, not every time that you want him to. And there have been times where maybe I didn't, quote unquote, desperately need a word from God, but he still spoke to me, and I consider that a gift out of his grace. But I can never think of a time where I desperately needed God and I continually prayed. I cannot think of a time when I did not hear an answer to that. And so God, I'll say this pretty confidently, God will always speak to you every time that you need him to, not every time that you want him to. Sometimes when you want him to, he will. Not every time, though. So there are going to be times that we don't hear him, and that's okay. So it looks like you have something.
Yeah, that just brought me back to a verse. It was Jeremiah 29:13. It says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. So we're going to be able to find God. But we got to be wholehearted about it. We got to be able to be like, all right, God, I give you everything. Use me and allow me to speak to you, because I feel this type of way towards you. But if we're praying like nonchalantly, all right, God, please help me throughout this. And we're like, it's like a little fake prayer. Like, you're not all invested into it. Like, maybe it's like a little fake, dear God, please put food in to the nourishment of by Jesus' name. Amen. That's not really wholeheartedly praying to God. That's just blessing the fast food so you can eat, you know? So there's a big difference between praying and wholeheartedly praying. Because it says here, when we're seeking God in prayer, we are going to find God and we're going to hear him. But if we're not, and we do like a little 5-minute whatever God prayer, then we're probably not going to hear him. And that's the difference between two when we first starting off the, baby mindset of a Christian to getting a more mature adult mindset. You're going to have those times where you try to cultivate prayer, and it's not going to be all of that, but then eventually, the more we seek him, we will find him. But it's baby steps. It's baby steps, and we got to take those steps, or we're always going to be on the baby step. We're not going to be able to climb upwards. Another point that you said in your sermon, it was an if thing. It was like, if God isn't leading you to the promised land, then what is he doing? Because you're like, what? God, what are you doing? So you gave 2 points. It says, God is working in you to lead you to the opportunity.
I remember this. If God is not leading you into the promise, one of two things are true. Either God is working in you to make you ready for the opportunity, or God is working in the opportunity to make the opportunity ready for you. And so I said, so what if it's not so much a waiting season as it is a God is working season? And so, actually, I was just writing some things on this about how in our waiting, God is working.
But that's when we can't hear him at all. We're like, God, where'd you go? You abandoned me. But God's like, hold on, my sister. I'm just working behind the scenes. You're just going to give me a second. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, we just got to be waiting patiently, because sometimes we can get a little bit frustrated.
What if I told a relationship story?
Okay.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
Our first date.
Oh, boy.
Can I share this?
Yeah, you can.
All right, so we said that we were going out for dinner, and I saw you at like 1:00, like early afternoon.
Yeah. And
I told you, I said, all right, I got to go run some errands. And you said, where are you going? And I said, I don't know. And I didn't tell you. I didn't tell you nothing. Do you remember this?
Suspicious.
You remember this?
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah. And so I told her, I was like, yeah, I just got to go run some errands. Don't worry about it. And so for a few hours, I didn't text you. I didn't tell you where I was going. I didn't tell you what I was doing.
Nope.
But I was going out and I was getting things for our first date.
All for a good thing, I would think.
What's that?
All for a good thing.
Well, I was trying to make it a good thing.
Yeah.
And I won't say exactly what it was, but I was getting a bunch of different things and getting the first date ready. And so, but for those few hours, you didn't hear from me. Mm-mm. You didn't know what I was doing.
I was about to question, I'm like, where did the world this man go? What
you didn't know
doing?
Where I was.
I didn't know where you went at all.
And sometimes God is working on the promise that he has for us. Sometimes God is working on the plan that he has for us. And he's up there and he's working. And so we can pray and we can be like, God, what are you doing? Where are you? I don't know what's going on right now. But in the same way, like he is working on something. He is crafting something. But sometimes those are the seasons where we can't hear him at all. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes those are really difficult seasons. But if we can keep in mind, if we can remember like, okay, this is not a waiting season. This is a God is working season. And so maybe you can't hear God right now, but we can still trust, even though we can't hear him, we can still trust that he's working right now.
It's just a change in perspective.
It's a different perspective.
Because it's like, all right, God, I'm in this waiting season. Here we go again. Now let's just change that perspective. All right, God, I'm in a working season. You're going to work through me, even though I'm not going to be able to hear you sometimes, even though I'm going to be left alone, not left alone like he left us, but like you just won't be able to. You feel like you're alone because he's not going to be able to be that present in your life. You're not going to be able to probably feel him much, you know, and you're praying and then your prayers are not getting answered. Like, all right, God, you abandoned me now. Where'd you go? And he's like, hold on a second. Probably get annoyed. He's like, girl, if you just knew what I had in store for you, just trust me. Then it's going to be all right. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, we just get in our own little brains and like, oh my, this is not going to work out. God, what am I going to do next? And I'm like, please just trust me. I got this. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and then that next point says sometimes when God calls us to a promise, the obstacles are impossible to overcome alone. Mm. And I'm like, oh, that was so good because, yeah, we have obstacles in our lives. That like that little roller coaster, we're going to go every little way. But doing it without God is impossible. Mm-hmm. Doing it with God, that's when we can do it. And what was so cool about when I last preached and you last preached is we was talking about the same verse from different parts of the Bible. But isn't that cool that the Bible has same verses everywhere?
Same verse, just a different gospel.
So you read out loud Matthew 19:26, and it says, Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And I'm like, wow, with God nothing is impossible. So God's thoughts of it was, just don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing, and it's going to be possible with me.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't go with me, then it will be impossible. And then at that times, if we don't do it with God, then we'll be like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how far. We got to go. I can't see what's in front of me. But God's like, if you just go with me, it'll be possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll send that little fire by night and that cloud by day to lead you to the path where you need to go.
Yeah. As you look throughout the Bible, Jericho walls don't fall alone. The Red Sea doesn't part itself. Manna doesn't fall from the sky without God. There's a lot of miracles that happen in the Bible. There's a lot of stories and great accomplishments that happen in the Bible that would not happen if it wasn't for a divine movement of God or a divine outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And so sometimes in life, there are some things that just are impossible for us to do without God. And I think that God puts us in these situations because he wants us to learn to trust in him. He wants us to put in these situations where it's like we need to depend on him to get through this because he wants to teach us, like, I'm going to provide for you. One of my favorite stories in the Bible, and I don't think I preached on this, but I did a devotional on it, which is kind of like a sermon. It's called something else. I don't know. It's during a Thanksgiving service maybe. And I talked about how the way that God provided manna, God gave them manna on the ground every day. Mm-hmm. But they could never store up for the next day unless the Sabbath was the next day. Otherwise, they could never store up for the next day, which means that every single day they did not know where their next day of food was coming from. And it put them in this place of dependence on God, because if God didn't provide, they would not be able to make it. And you would hope that that would build their faith, because every time that they needed God to come through, God came through and God gave them what they needed. But as we read in the scripture, sometimes that didn't exactly strengthen their faith, and they still had their doubts, and they still had times when they didn't trust God. But in life, when we go through these things, let God's provision strengthen your faith. Let God's deliverance from these situations of dependence strengthen your faith. Because look back at your life. Every single individual day, God has provided for you up until this point. He's not going to stop tomorrow. No. He's not going to stop next week. He's not going to stop next year. He has a plan that he's been working on for a long time. You just haven't walked into it yet. So let these situations strengthen your faith, because for the Israelites, they didn't, and they paid the price. So when God puts you in these seasons of dependence, walk into that and depend on God. Don't worry about it. Depend on God.
And it says that God never changes. He's the same as yesterday, today, and forever. Mm-hmm. So as we go back to the Israelites, God did provide for them. Even though the Israelites didn't fully trust God, that was their problem almost. Like, they had to be the ones to fully surrender and trust God. And if they did, they probably would have had an easier life.
Probably would have gone a lot better for them.
Maybe like just a little bit, a lot better for them. You know what I mean?
A little bit, a lot better for them.
Yes. Because, if they would have just trusted God in that moment, they would have probably been able to live in that promised land. Instead of waiting for the next generation.
Yeah.
But he had to trust the next generation to be able to go into the promised land. And then there's still doubters that didn't even fully trust him. But the people that did soaked into God's blessings and were able to receive that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the lines in my next sermon that I'm working on is that God cannot give you what you do not have the faith to receive.
Ooh.
So I won't expand on that now. That might be next podcast. Oh,
that's a good point.
I'll leave you with that now. We can move on in the notes.
Wow. All right. And then we finally get to the part where we're talking about light. And I think I wrote down the wrong verse because I couldn't find it. But it says that.
Oh, Psalm 119, verse 109?
See, all I heard was 19:105, and I'm like, this is not right.
I think it's 119, 109.
All right, let me just flip to it.
It should be, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Yeah, but it's...
Oh, sorry. I want to hear you read it, though, from your Bible.
What was the verse?
119... 105, maybe?
Oh,
Next
I'm in
page.
118. Ooh, that has a lot of verses.
119 is the longest chapter in the Bible.
I know. Wow. All right. Yes. And it says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And you kind of expanded on this point. God, with faith, God's only going to show us a little bit of our path. You go back to the Israelites in the fire by night and the pillar by day. He only let them so far during the day, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't able to go to point A to point B like that. They had a lot of traveling to do. And that time, Israelites just had to trust where they're going, because back in those days, they didn't have a GPS. They didn't have any directions. All they had was God in the cloud, you know. So, like,
God in the cloud.
God in the cloud. So how are they going to know where to go except for, like, all right, let's just follow this weird cloud, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully this will lead us somewhere. I just think that's really cool how God leads us to different ways. Like to Bethlehem, what do they follow? The star in the sky? All right, let's just follow the star. Maybe that would help. We're just so advanced in tech. Anyways, off my tangent. But yeah, the Israelites were only led by God like so much throughout the day, and they weren't able to walk that far, you know? So it's the same with us. God's only going to light our next step. He's going to only light like a step in advance to where we need to go. And we ask the question, like, why is that? And I think the answer to that is if God lit our whole trail and was able to see what the end of that trail was, like the Israelites did, they saw the Red Sea, then they're going to be probably questioning, like, well, God, how am I going to get across the Red Sea? I mean, that's the sea. I can't cross the sea. Am I going to swim across the sea? And then they're probably just like, well, this is pointless because this not going to get me to the promised land. So we're just probably need to go a different way because we can't go this way. Mm-hmm. It's impossible. We can't go by ourselves. We can't go straight to this path because it's lit up for me and there's so many big old obstacles in the way. I can't do it, God. I give up. I can't do it.
I can't do it.
That's why God only lights a certain light in our path, because he gives us these little baby steps. All right, I can climb this little obstacle. This is going to help me and advance me to my next step in life. That's going to cultivate me to do more with God, to be able to trust him more, so that when we have darker things that we have to go through in our lives, we'll be able to get through it and trust God with that. So that's why he just lights a little bit of our path. So that way, when we finally get to that big step of the Red Sea, we're going to trust God with that and trust him with being able to part the waters. Trust him with being able to help us with any part of our life that seems like it's a big mountain. But with God, it's nothing. It's literally nothing.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever been guilty of this, but I have. Or I read stories like Joseph in the Bible, and I'm like, oh, well, it's obvious why God didn't show Joseph the whole plan. Because Joseph probably would have just ran away, right? Like, if I was Joseph, I would have been like, yeah, it's probably not worth it.
This is scary. You know? I don't want to do this, God.
But I don't know if you've ever been guilty of this, but I've been in a position where it's like, God, you can tell me the plan. Like, I can handle it. I promise. Have you ever done that before?
Something like that.
I've talked to God. I've been like, God, like, it's okay. Like, you can tell me, like, what it actually is.
God.
But I don't think that there's a place in the Bible where it's easier than the people thought it would be. God's plan always seems to be a little bit longer than we thought that it would take. Seems to be a different route. Seems to be a little more difficult overall. And so I think there's a reason why he doesn't give us all those things at once. There's a reason why he doesn't give us the directions, sometimes only the destination, or sometimes he just says, go.
That's what I wrote down. It's like, he lights it up so we can go down
Mm-hmm.
and we can say yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a big part of my life recently, was just say yes to God. Whatever he calls you to do, stop in that moment. Don't be scared of it. Don't try to compromise with God. Don't try to say, oh, but God, I'm going to go this. No. Just say yes and fall in with God and He'll lead you on your path. But that's hard to do because we don't know what's next. And we don't know what's ahead of us. We might have a little vision of it, but we don't know the full picture. So when we say yes to God, we got to be all in. And if we're not all in, then we're going to be questioning, we're going to be doubting, we're going to be scared, and we might still be scared in that season where we're just saying yes to God and He leads us a different direction. That's scary sometimes. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, when we get out of that scaredness and be able to do what God has told us to do and be able to fulfill that, we're like, oh yeah, God, I was scared in that moment, but you helped me get through it. And now I can conquer bigger challenges because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a few days ago, we were driving, and it was dark, and it was raining.
That was scary.
And I hated it. Yeah, I was like, this is just not fun driving. I usually enjoy driving, but I did not that night. And I put the destination in my GPS. And like I said, like sometimes God doesn't give us that whole route. But I want to appeal to a different part of this analogy where I had to trust the GPS. Because I couldn't see too far.
I'd say you can't see.
I couldn't see out my front windshield too far. I could only see just a little bit in front of me. And so I had to trust, like, okay, hopefully my phone knows where I'm going. My phone knows where it's taking me. And I don't. I have no idea how to get there. And so I had to put it in. It was like, took us, 40 minutes, an hour to get there, however long it was.
Oh my, yes.
It was way too long, but
and
I had to trust that even though I had no idea where I was going, and even though I couldn't see, that the GPS knew where I was going, and that's why I was able to keep driving. And I think in the same way, and in those times, we just need to trust that God knows where we're supposed to be going. Mm-hmm. God knows the route to get there. And even if we can't see, and even if we don't know how much farther we have left to go, we just need to trust in His authority and in His guiding in that.
And that brings on to the next point. It's like, we don't need to know everything. We don't need to know everything. Because faith involves not knowing everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would we have faith if we knew everything? God, I already know what to do. I don't need you.
Right.
Why would we need faith if we knew everything? So we just need to follow God's God, even when we don't know everything.
Faith is belief in what we cannot see.
Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is confident in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
Yeah, when you read that verse, you see one thing stated, one thing's implied. The thing that's stated is that faith is confidence in what we hope for, assurance of what we do not see. So it's stated, faith is confidence in what cannot be seen. What's implied is that in life, there are some things that we will not be able to see.
Right on, right on.
Hey, that's a good thought right there.
Oh boy.
Anyway.
Yeah, and sometimes we're just gonna like question God with that.
Mm-hmm.
And your next point was like, God, I'm stuck. What am I supposed to do now? The Israelites, back to story, was hit by a wall because they went towards the Red Sea and they didn't know where to go. It's like, God, what are we doing now? And so they had to like rush and make a decision. And what am I trying to say?
I can take over. God, I'm stuck. The Israelites. Yeah, they hit a wall, which a wall is kind of metaphorical because what they actually hit was just a giant body of water.
Yep.
Which was the Red Sea. And I love the part where I talked about, because as you read in this story, I said, only our God can help His chosen people cross the sea without even needing to know how to swim.
Wow.
And that's just the way that God delivers, is that He sees our, what's the word that I'm looking for? He sees how we're not enough. And He says, that's okay, because I am. God sees our inadequacy. That was the word that I was looking for. God sees our inadequacy, and he says, that's okay because I have an overflow of being enough, of having enough, of being powerful enough to do this.
And being able to equip you to be enough.
And he gives us whatever we need to make it through. And so I love how, like, only our God can help us cross the sea without us even needing to know how to swim. In our lives, there are going to be situations where we will not be able to cross without him. But he's the kind of God who can equip us to give us the deliverance from those situations. Yeah, then let me go ahead and throw one more thing in there. So I try to emphasize this in the sermon, but sometimes it's difficult to explain while preaching because you get into these moments where it's like you're just preaching, and sometimes I wish that I had a little more time to kind of more articulately reflect on the point that I'm trying to make. And so here's the point that I was trying to make, because then I hopped into Exodus 14, verse 10, where it says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. And so the picture that I wanted to paint was this, that the Israelites hit this wall. So we're going back before they crossed the water. The Israelites hit this wall, and now they had the Egyptians chasing them. And in life, sometimes we have situations where we need to make a decision, or we need to move forward, or we need to do something. And it's like, okay, well, at least I have some time. And then all of a sudden, there's some kind of time constraint, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, I have a year and a half, and then I'm done with college.
Oof.
And so I need to make a decision, and the time to make a decision, like, it's going to keep on getting closer and closer and closer. And so sometimes we're put in these life situations. And so this is what I wanted to explain. Because like I said, the Bible's so real. Sometimes we're put in these situations where we don't know what to do. And there's stress coming from behind us telling us that we need to do something. And it's pushing us. Move. And it's like, you have to do something. And it's in these situations where it can be really hard to cry out to God because it's like, I just need to act. And we go into this like fight or flight mode. Like we just need to do something. But even in those situations, what does Moses tell them? He says, wait, be still,
and stand firm.
Stand firm. The Lord will fight for you. And so I wanted to paint that picture that in life, we're going to be in these situations where the timeline to make a decision comes closer and closer and closer, which means that the stress just gets more and more and higher and higher. And in those situations when it's very stressful and you're in this constraint, be still, stand firm, wait on the Lord. He has a plan. He's going to make a way through. So that's just something that I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, because it's like I said, the Bible's such a real book, and I'm sure there's a lot of people going through situations that have been through situations like that. So I wanted to encourage you with that. God's already been working on the way forward. You just got to walk into it. So be still. It's going to be okay. All right. Let's move on to probably the last part of the notes that we have here.
Could I add just a little bit?
Let's go ahead.
To that.
Go ahead.
So sorry. But when you said, Moses said, wait, be still. God's not talking about, all right, be still forever and ever, you know. There's got to be a point where you got to be able to calm down just a little bit, hear God in the sense, and then you got to pick it back up and be like, all right, let's act in faith and let's move on. Because God's going to give you like a little, all right, divinity, this is what you're supposed to be doing. I just need you to act on it. But if we don't got the faith to act on it, then we're not even like, we got to listen to God. And we got to take that action to listen to God. So I think that was just really important, that we can't be still forever. Soon enough, we're going to have to act on it, because if we're not, then we're not going to be in obedience to what God has. Because if he spoke it to us or give us a little hint, we've got to go ahead and do it.
That's a good point. Sometimes faith is kind of like playing red light, green light, because there will be some seasons where God tells you to wait and be still, and you got to wait, and you got to wait. And then almost out of nowhere, he's going to say, go! He's going to be like, this water's parted. You got Egyptians behind you.
You got to go.
Now you got to go.
You got to go.
Like, for a time, the Israelites camped outside the promised land. They scouted it out. And then once the scouts came back, God said, go.
Now and they probably was not expecting that at all.
It was probably like, okay, now we got to go. And in our own lives, be ready for when God tells you to wait, and then wait where you're at, and do your best to be content in that. But wait observantly. Wait ready. because in our waiting season, eventually there's going to be a time when God tells you to go. And when he gives that green light, it's time to go. It's time to move. So yeah, that's a good add-on. I like that.
I think that goes into like a little story
Go ahead.
time. I don't know if I'm going to share. But like when we was before we started dating, God would put me in a little waiting season. He's like, all right, Devin, I'm going to wait. You're going to find someone at SWU. And I believe that. I just didn't think it was going to happen like the first semester. And it did. But it was like better than I expected, because at first I'm like, wait, but God, I was, doing great. I was like waiting my season. But I wasn't prepared to go. I wasn't prepared for change. But then God's like, just go. It's going to be great. I got you a plan. I got you a boyfriend. You're just going to have to go. And I'm like, okay, God, this is weird. I've been waiting for a long time now, but I guess I'll go. And then I went, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is great. And now look at us. We're doing ministry together, and it's something bigger and better and greater than I ever thought. And so, yeah, that was my little wait. But then God's like, go. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, God, I get you now. Got to wait. But then when I prayed that prayer, and then he's like, let's go. And I'm like, okay, I'm going now. And so that's just a little example of that.
That's good. I like that.
All right. Last point. And I promise we're
almost done
wrap
here, but
this up for y'all.
We're having too much fun today.
I know. So, yeah, we was talking about we was talking about the wall and the Israelites. And it all just kind of ties in where there once stood a wall before the Israelites. But that's about to be used for God's glory. Because if we know the story, then we know that the sea parted and they're able to walk through that wall. It's like a miracle. They were able to see both sides of the water, and the Israelites were going. And then guess who's behind them? Pharaoh and his army. And they're coming on their tail. And so, yeah, then they'll go. The army goes and try to get them in the water. And they go through the ocean. And then once the Israelites is good and on the other side, guess what God does? He closes that wall and drowns those enemies. So that was when he used it for God's glory. So sometimes we're going to have that wall in our lives. And once we get over that wall, then that's going to be used for God's glory. Yeah.
One thing I love that before it even happens, God doesn't tell Moses exactly what he's going to do. But Moses tells the Israelites, the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again.
Wow.
That's powerful to have that kind of faith. It's the same kind of faith that Abraham had with Isaac when God promised him nations and then said, I want you to sacrifice your son. Abraham told the servants that were walking with him, wait for us here, and we will return to you. Even though they didn't know what was going to happen, they still spoke with confidence that God was going to move in a certain way. We will return.
Wow.
Right. And so in these situations, you see such confidence that these people speak with. It's like they have the testimony before it even happens. It's like they're praising God before God's even moved because they know that he's about to. And so, yeah, every obstacle that we encounter has the opportunity to become a testimony for God's glory.
Amen to that.
The Israelites, they were stuck and slaves in Egypt. They had a need. And what did God do? He delivered them. He gave them freedom. The Israelites, they don't know where to go afterwards. What does God do? He gives them direction in the pillar of fire. Once they're wandering in the wilderness, they don't have any food. What does God do? He provides manna on the ground. The Israelites, when they're trying to walk into the promised land, they're led by Joshua. He says, take Jericho, and Jericho has these walls. They can't get through the walls. What does God do? He tears these walls down. Every time that God moves, it becomes a testimony of how great he is and the power that he has that goes back and reveals the glory of God. And it's these amazing things. And it is supposed to be these testimonies that can strengthen our faith and encourage us because God has delivered in these past things so that we are able to trust that he will continue to deliver in the future things as well. Every wall that we encounter, God can use as a testimony for his glory.
Wow. And then the very last part was talking about how God has a plan and he's about to move. But how is it going to move? We just got to be still in that moment so he can fight for us and help us to move that direction. So one of the closing, actually like 3 closing questions, but the first one was, are we willing to walk right through the plan God has for us? Willing to walk right through it. Even if we see a little fire in front of our feet, even if we see little signs, are willing to go to those signs and walk with God through that. And the second one is, do we have the faith to walk in God's plan and surrender our own? And that's been a big testimony of mine. Not saying that it was easy, but over these past couple months, like, my plan was way different than what I had encountered. Like I shared earlier, my plan was to go to college and chill for the first year and focus on classes and grades and running. And then God provides me with Jared. And
hey, guys.
Yeah. And it's like, now you're going to have someone to walk life with. In that moment, I was just content with me and God. And God's like, no. I want you to surrender your plans to me because I got something better. And I'm like, all right, God. And so when I did that, I see how much better it is, of how I can still be able to pursue ministry at college when I thought I was on a little break, So it's been very nice and been very blessed of where God has led me. But if we think about it, if I was to go my own plan, I would still be single. I would still be running and focus on my grades. And I would not be able to pursue ministry like I am now. And I would be in a completely different stage in my life. But since I listened to his plan, I got all these opportunities and doors open right out in front of me. And I thank God for that. And I'm like, thank you, God, that I trust you enough to be able to walk into the light where you led me. Thank you that I was able to sit down long enough to hear your voice in that season of wait, my daughter, and just pursue me. And I'm like, all right, God, I see you. I'm waiting for you. I surrender my life to you. Because in that moment, I was confused. I'm like, God, why is this occurring? I thought I was good to go. I had a plan for my own. But that wasn't God's plan. And that's why I was so confused. But once I laid that down, that confusion went with it. And I was able to have a clear mind of what God wanted me to do then on.
Are we willing to walk out God's plan, even if it's not the one that we had in mind? That can be really hard, because sometimes God takes a few turns that we don't totally understand. It takes us to a few pit stops along the way that we don't know why we're stopping there. But God's had this plan for us before we were even born.
That is right.
And praise God for that. Well, I don't have anything much to add. I think this has been a really good episode, good discussion. Just one last thing that I want to add. At the time that this comes out, we will have Worthy
Podcast merch. I'm so excited.
Yeah, hopefully soon we'll be able to be wearing those. It's in the mail right now, being shipped. It's on a bit of a delay. But probably around the holiday season, a little bit slow, but it's officially out. You can check out the website. Should be linked hopefully around. Check the description, or if you're on the podcast apps, check the episode description. YouTube should be in there.
Just look for a link that says
look for it.
The Worthy Podcast best merch in the game.
Worthy
Just look for that.
Merch, comfy shirts, whatever. So we're super pumped for that. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that we were able to provide some value and encouragement, and hope that God was able to speak to you in whatever season that you're in through the Word of God, because the Word of God, it's real. It's 100%. Real to me. It's real to what we go through today. And that's what we wanted to share today. That's all I got.
Hope that encouraged you. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And join us next time for the Worthy Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I got.
Peace.
Peace.